inviting me. It's like a big honor for me. And these are people, there's so many people there who I like know and respect. And I'm just really grateful. Thanks. I'm trying to figure out what I can look at while I'm talking to you. Hold, give me 1 second. I'm going to try to pin something. So I decided against PowerPoint because it wasn't really going to serve my purpose. Like, I feel like I do really want to have a conversation with you, and I want to get like a timing guideline from you, Ravit, I guess, about like, I do want to have time for a real discussion. Well, how long do you think I should share my stuff and then pause?
So we have till 1. So I would argue, I don't know, you want to share for like half an hour or so, and then we'll have a nice chunk of time to chat.
Yeah, that sounds good. Again, thanks to everybody for being here. Thank you, Erin, for organizing the Zoom. I would not be able to do it. So let me talk about humility and partnerships. I'm assuming that a lot of you, because of the kinds of work you do, know a lot about partnerships. There's been lots of discussion about research practice partnerships and social design experiments and community engaged work. You've got leaders in that space, like in your own school. In those contexts, people often talk about being humble in partnerships and recognizing that other people you're partnering with have expertise and know stuff, right? That's the reason why we partner with them, right? We partner with them because they know things. They know things we don't know. And I have really been thinking a lot about humility these days and thinking about what it means for me as a woman of color scholar doing this work. Being humble was not what I was taught to do at UC Berkeley. At UC Berkeley, I felt like it was beaten into me that I better learn how to not be so humble about what I know, right? It was like I had to learn how to say, I know things, right? I know things. Here's how I'm going to write. I need to take out the hesitations in my writing. I need to approach people in meetings as if like, here are the things I know. That did serve me. It served me well. I mean, I got a faculty position and, built a career in those ways. But I will say I always struggled with acting like I know a lot. And I used to think it was my personality. I used to think it was related to my cultural upbringing as an Indian American growing up in the United States with immigrant parents. I wondered, like, where did this idea that I need to be humble come from? And I have learned that, you can be humble in some situations with some people, and that will be received very well. You can be humble in other situations and will be read poorly, right? It'll be read. It's hard for me to say this, and I'm like looking for the nods, but it'll be read like you don't know what you're talking about. And I think especially for me, I've experienced it as a woman, as a person of color. When I say I don't know things, it's like, that I want to learn with people. It is often taken as if like, I don't know what I'm saying, right? So I've learned to like do the dance of when can I share that I really am genuinely interested in learning stuff? And when can I share that like, I know what I'm effing talking about. Like I know stuff, right? So I'm sharing this because it's a tension I live with, right? And I do think that some of the healing that I have been thinking about these days with graduate students and the kinds of harm that come to graduate students of color has to do with how we position ourselves as authorities and experts in things that we know. So that's kind of the background of why I like to talk about humility. And I do want to say that I think humility is often talked about as a personal disposition, that you are to be humble. You're meant to have humility. And I think that doesn't serve us well. I'd rather think about humility as something that we can design into our, like the infrastructure of our design. So how can we build humility and like humble moves into our, into the like material interactional, relational, technological dimensions of the designs that we're creating. And the reason I prefer to think about humility in that way is that I think it can live on in our designs, and I think it can change structures and policies and like practices in ways that can have a life and be sustained beyond the individual who might be running a program. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about that? I know I'm like talking a lot. Anything? Reactions? All right, I'll keep asking. So I want to organize this around two examples from partnership work that I've done. And one is from my research with promotoras, who are food and social activists in a neighborhood in Denver, I'll just say. And the second is from my work running an after-school STEM program that was designed to support elementary students and pre-service teachers as they worked side by side on interest-driven long-term projects. And that program brought together children who were from majority Mexican and low-income backgrounds together with pre-service teachers who were majority white and female. So the program had multiple goals, and one was to help the pre-service teachers learn how to engage in humanizing and, equity-oriented, community-centered pedagogies. So both projects could be described as social design experiments, and I've described them that way, but I'm not a fan of like labeling the kinds of things I do in that way, because I think I really draw on a variety of perspectives to do my work. Okay, so the first example will be kind of the shorter example. It's from my work with promotoras in the food justice movement. So we entered that program and that work trying to be humble. We were reading all this stuff about how to do partnerships well. We did all the kind of like right things in our project to get to know the community, to spend time there, to understand the histories. And we were also like designing projects and technologies that were really responding to what the people in the community were telling us were problems that they were facing. And I just remember a big shift for us happened one night in a Starbucks where my team, who's amazing, and some of the promotoras were together. Actually, it was just one promotora that night, the lead. We're all talking about what we were going to do to uncover some of the tensions in the organization that were related to misogyny or sexism and kind of like labor issues, right? And so we're at this Starbucks pretty late in the evening, and my team, so graduate students and I, we're getting into it. And we're talking about Freire, and we're talking about pedagogy of the oppressed, and we're talking about how we're going to use these ideas to design a conversation where we could uncover tensions, right? We were getting into it. And, many of you are in graduate school, how you can get into it and start kind of tearing apart a theory and talking about what it could do and what it's not doing. And the promotora who was with us, who was helping us in doing this work and doing the design, she could speak English and Spanish, but she was much more proficient in and more comfortable in speaking Spanish. She pulled me aside and she said, "Susan, all I hear right now is English, English, English." And I was like, oh shit, that's not good. Holy cow, what have we been doing? She's like, I'm getting a headache from all the English that's being spoken. And so we, the team, we paused. I was like, all right, guys, it's a little late. We should probably stop. We went home and I talked with my team and I was like, boy, we are not doing what Paulo Freire would recommend. We need to stop privileging theory and privileging English in this community. And the quick story is, and very quickly, we totally shifted. We had team members who spoke Spanish, and there were people in my graduate students, and I understand Spanish, who could speak Spanish, but we were choosing to speak in English, right? From that point on, we led with Spanish. We pretty much only spoke Spanish in our meetings with the promotoras, in all the like big sessions we held at the nonprofit where the promotoras worked in the community. And I'll tell you that shift from speaking English to speaking Spanish changed the nature of the conversations we're having. It changed what kinds of like problems were being named as problems. In the most basic sense, there were promotoras who couldn't express themselves in the nuanced ways they wanted to using English. But as soon as we stopped doing that and used Spanish, we were getting so much greater understanding of what was going on. And because I can understand Spanish, but cannot speak Spanish the way I can speak English, I started to play I took an actual backseat, when we drive around the neighborhood, so to the people who could speak Spanish, and they'd be in the front seat and I'd be in the back. It really changed what I understood was going on. It changed the power dynamics in that project. That happened in very early on in our project, and it opened up like what was possible in that partnership and the kinds of trust that they had in me and what we could do together. And I just think like I learned from that. And I felt like that was a moment where I was humbled, and my response, I think, was correct, which is that we're going to change everything. Right. And so I wanted to start with that example, just to give you sort of the nugget of the kinds of things that I have been experiencing in my, partnership work and how I responded to it. And like I said, I didn't just say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't just say like, oh my God, I'm sorry, and I'm going to be humble now. We made changes to how we were doing the research, and we changed everything. Like we changed how we were, who we were paying, who we invited to be partners. And that made a difference. And you can read about it in papers we've written about it. I want to jump to the second example, which is a little bit, little more complicated, and tell you that I entered this partnership, the one with the after school club, after it was already going on. I inherited this program. And so in this one that I inherited, it's a little complicated because I didn't start the partnership. My colleague at the university started the partnership with the principal at the school where the after school club was run. And they had their own set of like protocols and participant structures that they use in their partnership design. So when I inherited this program, I knew a lot about theory. This is a fifth dimension after school club. I have been reading about this since I was in graduate school and then as a postdoc. And I had participated in this program as like a side researcher in the space, but I wasn't in charge. So I knew a lot about sociocultural theory and like what this program was meant to be doing and how it was meant to challenge structures and transform them. But I had almost no idea about what it would mean to run an actual program for children and pre-service teachers across two contexts, and like the legal dimensions of the partnership and the fundraising. Like I hadn't done that before. And I had been working in community. I hadn't been working in a school. It was a lot for me to learn, right? So I took it on, and I was thinking, who's going to be my partner? Like, I need a partner. I can't do this by myself. And I don't know enough about this place. And so what I did was I hung out, and I realized that my partner should probably be this woman named Jovita Schiffer, who is my partner and is now my very close friend. And Jovita was the person at the school who was running the day-to-day on the ground partnership work. She was the person enrolling kids in our program. She was running a much larger after school program. She was fundraising. She was in contact with the families. All the families knew her. Trying to think of what else. She handled the discipline, and she also managed whenever there were conflicts or issues that came up between the university and the pre-service teachers and their needs, right? So I had come into this partnership while I had already been doing the work with the promotoras. And I was already, probably because I'm a woman of color, noticing, I always notice when I see other women of color doing a lot of work. And I noticed them organizing, building and maintaining relationships, handling the conflicts that come up, especially when they're working for the benefit of historically marginalized communities. That is often the work of women of color. I know that because I do that work, but I also am attuned to what I see other women doing. And I had been studying that in my work in Denver, right? And so I noticed that Jovita was doing that work. And I also noticed that nobody noticed her. It's what they call the quote unquote invisible work, the invisible labor. And so partly why she wasn't being seen was because she does not have the credentials. She doesn't have a bachelor's degree. And so when I went into this partnership and thought, okay, I need a partner, I will say that the principal at that time was like, you should work with me. I should be your partner. I'm working on my doctorate. I've got a master's degree. And I said, I want to work with Jovita because I think she knows our program already. She's got a deep history in the community. And the principal, advised me not to. She told me that she doesn't have a degree and I shouldn't be working with her. And that only, if you know me at all, sorry, I'm turning off my phone. If you know me at all, that only made me feel more committed to the fact that the person I should be working with is Jovita, right? And that she was clearly undervalued at the school, even though she held a lot of knowledge about what was needed and what the children and families needed. So Jovita and I became partners. And the two of us clicked on a number of levels. One is because we're both women of color. She's Puerto Rican from New York. I'm also from New York. And let me tell you, for those of you who are living in New Jersey, you probably understand people from New York have a way of talking and communicating that I don't want to generalize to everybody, but is a little bit more direct than folks out here in Colorado. And I think the two of us, we really connected and we were really able to very quickly understand that there were ways in which power dynamics and prestige were blocking the capacity of this partnership to really thrive. And so Jovita and I decided if we were going to be partners together in this, we were going to change the way we organize the whole partnership. And so what I'm going to describe, I'm just going to read from here because I wrote down some notes. We decided to make some moves that I would describe as humbling moves, right? And I'm calling them humbling moves because historically, researchers with PhDs who work at universities come in and act as though and get seen as having more power than people who don't have a PhD or don't have a bachelor's. We are seen as having more power and authority over people who work in elementary schools and public schools rather than the university. And we are seen as having more power and authority and expertise over people who interact largely with children and families from non-dominant racial, linguistic, socioeconomic backgrounds and teachers rather than university students in largely white teacher ed programs and faculty with multiple degrees. I mean, there's so many layers of ways in which I was privileged and my partner was not, okay? And that has been a theme throughout our partnership, has been how she never gets seen. I'm always seen, not always in good ways, but I'm always seen. And so we knew we needed, and I needed to do something to really work against that, right? And so what Jovita and I did, I just want to name some practical things because I feel like, that's what you want to hear about, the kind of behind the scenes. So what we did is we did set up at the highest level, like new flows of information and material and relational and like, financial resources that could expand our perspectives. And in changing those, it uplifted the ethical valences and power dimensions of the work we were doing together. So for instance, and they sound basic, but we weren't doing them before. I invited Jovita to attend our research and design team meetings on our campus and to class discussions on campus. So Jovita now had access to the university, and she started to understand the kinds of tensions that shaped the work we were doing. She understood the kinds of challenges we were facing when we were teaching mostly white pre-service teachers to work alongside not mostly, all kids of color in the after-school program. So Jovita helped us by coming to the school, to our campus, me and my grad students, navigate through the complexities of ensuring children's and families' safety and the desire to publish research that would advance our careers. She helped us to become much more cautious about exposing families' vulnerabilities, sensationalizing their challenges, or romanticizing their struggles. And I will say those are real things. Like my team of graduate students who are amazing are also scholars learning to become, like, trying to build their reputations and discovering new things and writing about like exciting ideas. They thought they wanted to write about some of the stuff that Jovita really told us is off limits, and she'd explain why. And those conversations were not easy conversations. And I had to manage on my team people feeling like, who is Jovita to tell us this? Why? What does she know about the importance of these ideas in our field? How much was Jovita paid? She was paid by the school. She wasn't paid by us. None of the grant money went to her. And yes, I've had many conversations with Jovita about how she was not valued at the school. We actually just wrote a paper about it. We tried a lot of different ways to figure out ways to pay Jovita, not through this project, but we actually did. We did manage to pay her in other ways. And I also managed to get her out of, we got her out of bad partnership relationships. So I could talk about that more in the question and answer. And you're right, it's totally messed up. And I felt you feel terrible being in these situations where these are the dilemmas of the research. It's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be part of this. How can we change these structures so that doesn't keep happening to our partners, especially our partners who are from historically marginalized communities, right? Another way we shifted or made a humbling move was I went to the after school club. I worked in the after school club on a regular basis, right? That's not always true in partnerships where people are working with kids. It's like I could have left my whole team to just manage the whole project. And I didn't. I went. Part of what I learned from going was, yes, I learned the on the ground every day kind of like challenges that our kids were having, that our pre-service teachers were having, that my site supervisors were having. But I also understood the ways that the principal and the leadership at the school and the teachers saw our program as highly disruptive, as noisy, as messy, as a bunch of undisciplined kids because we didn't discipline them in the ways that the school wanted us to, right? We didn't do that. We knew we were trying to challenge the way that they thought about the kids they were serving. And if I hadn't been going, I wouldn't have understood that, right? And so I would go, and Jovita it was like, it helped her, it helped the two of us understand what the design of the program needed. And it wasn't always what like the theory written about and the examples written about the program were like. We knew we had to do a lot more negotiating between the two institutions and the values of each place. And then the last, I was just going to say, Jovita invited me and like really wanted me, and I did join their fundraising and advocacy group at the school. That helped me understand all the dilemmas of funding that she was facing and that the principal was facing in the school. And that is like about how material resources were used and distributed. We had to, all the question about whether Jovita was paid. It's like, this is like what our partnership, we have spent so much time grappling in that space of like, what in the world are we supposed to do if people can't pay Promatoras in the other example, or they can't pay Jovita beyond what her paycheck, from the school district can give her. And it's like, I can only talk about that in its complexities from being in those spaces where my partners actually live and work. And I think I know the reason I do that is deeply tied to the conceptual, like theoretical orientation that I bring to the work. And I feel that oftentimes people are not doing that kind of engagement in the really messy, hard, ethical issues, because they're hard and they're not easy things for us to write about. And it implicates us, as researchers at universities. And it's hard to right now figure out, how do you move through that space? And how do you move with your partners in that space? And I'll just say, with Jovita right now, I think it's been about a decade that we've worked together, and we moved on from working in that after school program. We started there, and that's where our friendship started, but we moved because of the dilemmas that we faced in that setting. And we changed the kinds of projects that we do. And Jovita is the lead on the current project that we have. And the money goes to her. And I'm the consultant who doesn't get paid. And we're also now working on her, and she wanted me to tell you, her political campaign. So she's running for state senate. And I think that we still talk about how, like, this is our partnership. Our partnership began in one place and it snowballed and changed over time. And I think that kind of the humility that got built into this project across all the different levels has moved us away from some of the original questions we were asking. But I think fundamentally, we're still committed to changing the ways that historically marginalized communities, particularly children and their families, especially immigrant families, are being treated. It's helped us, but I'm just gonna say we're in it, and it is messy and complex. And I think we feel that we take risks all the time when we talk honestly about this. But I feel like there's no other way for us to talk about what we're doing, but to admit that it's not an easy space to be in. So I'm gonna stop there, and it's like got 25 minutes. So I hope we can have discussion now. Hope that's helpful to hear. So please ask me questions, and I'd love to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. You can hear us, right?
I can, yeah.
Thank you so much. That was, I think that a lot of times we don't get the behind the scenes of this work. People don't tend to publish as much. I mean, there's some, right? So there has been some work that's sort of published of the trials and tribulations of doing this work, but not nearly as much as I think we need. So hearing these stories is really helpful and really important. And I think we do have some questions. Claudia?
Yes, hi, sorry. Thank you so much for your talk, Susan. I really appreciate your careful attention to the work and discussions, especially about how you shifted your mindset and practices and the ways that you work with the promotoras. And I guess my question is connected to theory, right? and sort of stepping back and giving space for the promotoras and maybe some of the other graduate students to engage in the work. How did you see the theories that were being applied to the space change, right? So a lot of work that I do looks at, for example, pláticas as methods and methodologies, right? Or Chicanas Latinx methodologies, right? So in what ways did that then shift or support the conversations that were happening in the promotora space?
Yeah, totally. I feel like we did, I mean, I don't know if this is exactly what you're after, but thanks for the question. I think our approaches became much more aligned with what I know about pláticas, like and informal conversations and like organized by them and us being invited into those spaces. And like, I just saw them this weekend, right? They're doing great. We love each other, and we've been through some hard times together, but it's also became like organizing spaces. And I also felt like so organizing spaces where in that case, promotoras felt like they were not getting paid well. They were not getting paid enough, and they wanted changes in like what they were learning, how they were being educated and all that. And I described this as they understood what my capacity could be in this space, and they used me to do what they wanted to do. And they were all very open about it. They were like, Susan, you need to get on the board because there are no women of color on the board. You got to get on the board. Susan, you need to come to this event. Susan, you got to meet us downtown. And I was like, yes. And this is fantastic for me because I'm learning from you. Did we write about all that stuff? No. But it changed me fundamentally. And I realized, so I don't know what to call that, but yeah, they were organizing me. That's what I felt. And they were organizing my team. And it was related to getting resources from the university, which I'm very happy to figure out how to get them. Is that helpful at all, Claudia?
Yes, it is. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
You have other questions here in the room, just raise your hand. Clark, go ahead.
So Susan, toward the beginning, you talked about the tension between stuff and then there's lots of stuff you don't know. Can you talk more about, I always find it very difficult in these settings to figure out how to deal with the reality that I know stuff too.
I know.
And there's many times I think I don't say stuff I know because I'm not sure it's appropriate. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I struggle with that. And so there's a paper that Arshad Ali wrote that I use in my class that I thought was so perfect, where he writes about, when he worked in the community and he was like setting up the chairs, and like, I've done that too. Like, I'm setting up the chairs, I'm arranging the space, I'm bringing the food, I'm passing stuff out. And then having people be like, wait a second, you're a professor at the university and you have access to getting resources from these funders, etc. But you're doing what? You're setting up the tables and chairs. Don't misuse your expertise. Like, you have like authority here. Like, you should be doing that. Like, I thought that article speaks to that really well. And I have been in that space where I tend to act like, I don't lean in all the time on what I know about research or what I know about, I do lean in on what I know about how to get funding, right? I do that for sure. I'm really good at like networking and helping people network and telling people like, here's who I know, here's how I'm going to get you linked up into the university, world and all that. I struggle with saying that, I'm embarrassed to say it, that like the research you're doing is not comprehensive enough. It's not sensitive enough to the nuances of what's going on here. And part of that is me learning and not being sure if I know enough about what's going on. Maybe they are being sensitive enough to like what the circumstances are. So I try to say it in ways that where I'm just being honest about like, I'm not sure. This is how I would approach it. I'm not sure if that's the right way. This is how I would do an interview. Here's how I would analyze this data. I just want to make sure we're being transparent with each other. I try to share resources. It's tricky, Clark. I probably could do more, but I really do believe I don't know enough about other people's lived experiences. I don't know about what's going on with them. That's what I'm trying to learn. So yeah, I know some stuff about how to write things up, and I know how to like look across data and look for both themes that support our arguments and disconfirming evidence, right? Those are tricky things. I don't want to diminish people's lived experiences, but I need to add to them. I feel like that wasn't a good enough answer for you, but it's hopefully understood.
That's weird that it's saying. Grishma?
Hi, thanks so much for this talk. I think I'm kind of curious on hearing or thinking or hearing a little bit more about the sort of tensions around the humility, kind of picking up on what Clark was noting. I mean, one of the things that I wonder about is I think in anthropological spaces, humility is sort of asked of you. And I think that there's then becomes sort of a scholarly performance of humility, and a lack of attention sometimes to nuance and power relations, which I think what you highlight in your talk is you're attentive to that. But I wonder if humility is sort of built into the infrastructure of design, then how do we also think about integrity and humility so that this idea of humility becoming performative or a performance is worked out? You know, I'm not totally clear. I mean, I know what I'm saying, but I'm not sure if that was clear, but I'm wondering about that, the work of humility, because I think also humility can then become something that is celebrated for the scholar, right? If that makes sense, in certain places. So it's essential. And I also wonder about the sort of tone of humility and the integrity around it, and how that works itself out in research practice partnerships or in collaborative spaces or with oneself.
Right. You said it so well. I don't feel like, I mean, I feel like this is part of why I wanted to talk about humility is because I do feel like there's a performance of it that makes me crazy and doesn't help my partners. My partners have been harmed by that kind of thing. And you know, and I read articles where I'm like, they're talking about humility in the most superficial, in the most thin ways. And I'm like, that's great for you that you're humble, and people might think like you're humble and you're making ways for people who nobody respects to have a voice in project. It's great, but actually like we need to change it so that it becomes, we need to recognize that humility really should be built into our structures of how we do research. And maybe some of our structures need to like go get out of here, right? Like we got to get rid of some of those practices. We're going to have to change. I hope that like that kind of humility built into structures will make changes in other parts of our academic structure. You know, like for example, what gets counted as valuable research, right? For one easy kind of example at a tenure case, right? If you can write co-author with your partners, or you write different kinds of materials, not only research, but you write, you know, flyers and things that my partners actually want, or op-eds that they actually wish and need. So yeah, the performativity of it drives me a little bit nuts. And I don't think it just doesn't serve anybody. And it needs to be done. I mean, there is like a kind of individual work that we need to do, right? I mean, that's where I feel like it's hard to know, I guess, and I said at the start, like my graduate students tell me all the time, I should not act this humble. Like, they're like, don't be so humble. It's also what makes me, like, it's what my humility or acting humble then turns me into the Incredible Hulk when people think I know nothing. You know, it's like I need to be at a more even level instead of enraged when people think I'm a know nothing. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Brittany. I'm a PhD candidate at Rutgers. Thank you so much for this talk, Dr. Jurow. I was wondering, along the lines more of like Jovita and not getting paid and all of that. I was wondering the conversations, like how you problematized your doc students' feelings about Jovita's expertise. And
Yeah.
like, how did you challenge like them claiming to care about this work and care about, all of that, but yet they felt that because she didn't have a degree, they didn't necessarily have to listen to her. And I was just wondering how those conversations went.
Yeah, those were not easy conversations. I will say, just to clarify, Jovita was paid through her job. Okay, like she got paid by the school district. She didn't get paid for the extra work of dealing with the university and all its stuff, right? And so we tried to figure out ways to pay her, but honestly, Jovita felt like getting paid for that wasn't right, because she was just doing her job. So that's one piece of it. And the thing with graduate students, one was there were some graduate students who are not invited to return to the project. Okay, it's not that they were told to get off as soon as they did one thing that offended Jovita or was somehow disrespectful to Jovita. We managed it, but and they didn't say, oh, it's because she doesn't have a degree, right? They didn't explicitly say that, but it certainly felt that way to Jovita and to me. Like that, what was happening here is you're not listening to her, or you don't hear her or respect what she has to say because you're in a doctoral program and and she's not, right? So we had a couple of different kinds of conversations over the years, like one I'm thinking of in particular that involved legal issues. And what I did and explained to our team was that we know a lot about research and learning and how to think about designs and working with kids. But actually, the thing that Jovita knows a lot about that's relevant to this situation is these particular families, the legal consequences of what they're like, of sharing their story inappropriately will like do to them, the not just legal, but like the actual, like the kind of violence that can come to them if we share something that we think is really theoretically important, but actually can harm families, right? So I positioned her, Jovita and I talked about how we can name what her expertise is and like we just lead with that. And my team did come to understand her differently. And I will say that she has been a partner in our School of Education since I started working with her. And she has gotten involved in other projects and has been viewed as being a real leader in the space. And like she gets the recognition now at the university that she did not 10 years ago. And she's worked for that. The two of us have worked on that, but it took real work. And it's very disappointing. It's very sad sometimes to watch it happen to somebody I love, and to have funders of our school I'm thinking of one in particular where like we tried to get funding and, the way that wealthy people in the city were diminishing her and her value. So we talk every week. We have a regular meeting and it's been ongoing for a long time.
So I have a question for someone else. You mentioned somewhere along the line that there were tensions between how the school saw how these children should be treated and by discipline wise, and you know, the fact that they found the after school that loud and you know unwieldy and you know not academic, I'm assuming, and all of that. How did you manage that? Because on some level, right, it's when you think about community, it's nested, right? You have your first allegiances, so to speak, to the children, Jovita, the families, but this is nested in a school that's serving that community, and you're a guest there on some level.
Yes.
So negotiating that when you get caught between that, how did you manage that space, or any suggestions you have? Because we've been in that space too.
How do we manage? Number one, poorly. I mean, somewhat poorly. I mean, let's be real. Our kids were unruly. Our undergrads we were a loud club. And I'm saying this, and I want you to know that the Fifth Dimension after school clubs have a record. That is how they are seen, right? When they are in different spaces. Mike Cole, who started this program like many, many years ago, like that's how they were seen. They were kicked out of the library where they first started because they're too loud, right? I mean, it's complex because we're not there to discipline kids. Our approach to discipline was exactly the opposite of what the school did. That led to teachers not trusting us. Teachers feeling like, and leadership feeling like what we were doing in that club was not benefiting the children academically. So you're totally right. So one thing we did, and Jovita and I were, this was like, I feel like the first 2 years of our partnership, was trying to figure out how can we do a better job of helping teachers understand what we're doing in that space, and us to understand what teachers are trying to do, because we did not want to like demonize either side, right? We didn't want to work with this like binary of like the teachers in schools are terrible and the after school club, our program Epic is garbage, right? So we got money actually from the university to hire a graduate student who would spend I forget how many hours. She would spend time in the day school programming. She went to a classroom, and we offered and we had money to pay a teacher to work with us in the after school club. So we tried to like set it up so that we could really learn about what each other's contexts were like, and like what the kinds of political issues were in each of the spaces. I feel like our side, we learned a lot from the graduate student who was in the classroom, and she came back and helped us understand, what the school was up against. And in terms of the teachers, that did not work out well. Teachers are they don't have the time for, even when you're paying them, to think through with you like all the parts of the theory and what you're trying to go against. They are trying to create a space that's safe for kids in the way that they think what safety means. And you can't just take one teacher and invite them into a program, or 3. We've done it a variety of different ways when the leadership of the school doesn't believe in what the program is up to. So I think those were some of the things we did, but I think the real thing that made change was that I started going to their fundraising committee, and I got to know the principals, and the principals have changed 4 times in the time that like we were working together. So I was part of having conversations in those spaces that did help them understand the logic behind what we were doing. But there were some painful years of the teachers hating us and the principals not respecting us. And, my team suffered by going there. We problematized it. Jovita really understood what we were trying to do. I mean, it changed through time. I don't know, Ravi, does that help you?
It does. I mean, I think that sometimes the youth sort of get caught in a crossfire with these things, right? Because they're,
Oh, one more.
at some level just for being in this space, which is actually in many ways good for them. So yeah, I think that's again going back to the sort of managing the ethical
Yeah.
space here.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say another thing we did is Jovita and I did hire different kinds of people and graduate students and undergraduates. Like we changed I mean, I haven't even talked about that. We changed the curriculum, we changed who was teaching, we changed who we were hiring to work with the kids so that we were hiring people who had a complex understanding of what schools can do that's good. And we weren't only hiring people who were like, I hate schools. We weren't only hiring from the I hate schools,
Yes.
which was not good. It's not a good thing. Again, it's like we had to work against the binaries, and we did that in the classroom too, and like in the undergraduate spaces. So I do think we moved in a better direction after we started doing that. Does that make sense to you?
I think, yes, it does.
Yeah.
I think we might have time for one last question. If anyone has one on the Zoom, just raise your hand or here. I think people are digesting all the wonderful insights that you've given. It was really nice to hear, a lot to think about. I think that having these kinds of conversations is really helpful because you can share across. Yeah, I know what the heck that thing with the empty chair is talking about. The entire room is in this direction.
Oh, there is a question in here. Is it Christelle? Is that how you say your name?
Yes.
About sustainability. I will say that I do think that the sustainability part of it, that what was good was recognizing this idea of like schools can be good and organized differently, and after school programs can serve. And so that like knowledge between that both could be good and serve each other, Jovita and I really did a lot of work on that. And we really thought a lot about, like she said, this is what the kids in our school need. This is where they're not achieving well. Can we, come up with programming that would more directly address some of these concerns about literacy skills? So like the fact that we did that did make us seem like we were a more welcome group in the school. And again, it took us some time, but we became part of the regular programming, and our pre-service teachers who were trained in our program started to want to go to that school. And so that is another way in which like we sustained the partnership and they didn't want to kick us out anymore. But Jovita and I have both exited from that program now. Does that answer your question, Claudia? Oh, Claudia didn't ask that. Christelle? I just see a Claudia. Okay, great. One last one, or is there one there from Claudia? How do you work with grads?
Yes, I can explain it. So I think one of the things that I'm struggling with, I'm currently joining the job market or in the job market. So how do you work with grad students? I think one of the things we talked about is your struggle with like being an expert in spaces, but also feeling like your background and who you are as a person, right? You have this sort of like humbling aspect to how you go about the work. So how do you help students that you work with, graduate students that you work with, sort of engage with that or grappling with that, right? I feel like I do grapple with that, seeing myself as an expert, even with a PhD, right? Could be as a Latina, woman of color, whatever it is, how my mom perceives and sees anything that I do, right? If we think about it from that perspective, but how do you work with students?
What I tell students to really lean into is to like really ground themselves in the theories and the methodologies that those are the things that you should lead with. It's like when I'm telling you, like I use sociocultural theory, I take like an ethnographic and a interaction analysis, like as my approaches to thinking about these things. I feel like you get a lot from saying that like if somebody in this group said it earlier, I think Karishma said it, that like it's part of those traditions to recognize you don't know a lot. You don't know everything about other people's lives. And that's a fundamental assumption of the work that we do. So again, don't design stuff. Don't walk into communities designing stuff and proposing you got a new technology to solve their problems. It's like, go in there and learn what's been going on. That's not just a personality orientation. That is grounded in theory and methodology. So that's where I lean on theory and methods to methodology to help my students understand what they should be doing out there.
Thank you.
And the
Thank you
theories
very
will help you understand you got expertise too.
much. Right. Thank you.
Yep, sure. Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone, for staying with us on Zoom. Thank you, Susan, so
Oh, thank you.
it's been wonderful. It was also a nice, refreshing shift from PowerPoint presentation, which we also love, but this kind of change of pace with more talking and chatting, and I appreciate that, and I think everyone here does as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for asking me. It was really a pleasure.
You are welcome, and
Feel
have
free
a
to reach out.
wonderful week.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.